To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, we'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Before the Fall. Randall Brewer stood in the doorway of the nursery he'd spent 3 months building, the smell of fresh paint still lingering in the October air. His hands, calloused from years of construction work, trembled as he gripped the doorframe. The crib sat empty against the wall, mocking him with its unused mobile of tiny elephants that would never spin for the daughter they'd named Emma. "Randy." Holly's voice was barely a whisper from their bedroom. He turned away from the nursery and found his wife curled in their bed, her auburn hair spread across the pillow like spilled wine. It had been 3 weeks since the miscarriage. 3 weeks since they'd lost their first child at 22 weeks. 3 weeks since he'd watched his wife's light dim to a flicker. "I'm here, sweetheart." Randy sat on the edge of the bed, his 6'3" frame making the mattress dip. He brushed a strand of hair from Holly's pale face. Dark circles had taken up permanent residence under her green eyes. "I can't stop thinking about her," Holly whispered. "I can feel my arms aching to hold her, but she's not here. She'll never be here." Randy's jaw clenched. He'd cried once, alone in his truck the day they lost Emma, and then locked his grief away to be strong for Holly. Someone had to hold the pieces together. "We'll get through this. I promise you." Heath called again. Holly's voice cracked on her brother's name. "He wants to visit tomorrow." Randy's expression hardened momentarily before he smoothed it over. Keith Hickman had been a thorn in their marriage since day one. Holly's older brother had made it clear that Randy, a construction foreman from the wrong side of Pittsburgh, wasn't good enough for his baby sister. "Whatever you need," Randy said, though every instinct told him Keith's sudden concern was a Trojan horse. Holly reached for his hand, her grip weak. "I don't deserve you. Don't say that." He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "You're everything to me. We're going to heal from this together. I'm not going anywhere." But Randy didn't know that Keith Hickman had been waiting for exactly this moment. A moment of vulnerability, to execute a plan that had been brewing since the day Holly said, "I do," to a man her brother considered beneath her. The next morning, Randy left early for a job site in Homestead. He kissed Holly goodbye, made sure her medications were on the nightstand with water, and texted her 3 times before lunch. Each message went unanswered, which wasn't unusual lately. Holly often slept through the day, lost in the fog of grief and the medication her doctor prescribed. What Randy didn't know was that Keith Hickman had let himself into their home at 9 a.m. using the spare key Holly had given him months ago. What Randy couldn't have imagined was that Keith had brought someone with him. Peter Simon, a former paramedic who'd lost his license after being caught selling prescription drugs. And what Randy would never have suspected was that his brother-in-law had been planning this since the miscarriage, waiting for the perfect moment to destroy him. Chapter 2. The Architect of Ruin. Keith Hickman had always been the golden child of the Hickman family. While his sister Holly had been the creative one, painting, writing, dreaming, Keith had been the achiever. Harvard Law, partnership track at 42, a penthouse in Shadyside, and a reputation that made defendants tremble. But beneath the expensive suits and the perfectly maintained facade, Keith harbored a rot that had been growing since childhood. Control was his drug of choice, and Holly's rebellion. Marrying a construction worker instead of the corporate lawyer Keith had handpicked had been an unforgivable betrayal. "She's still asleep," Peter Simon said, checking Holly's pulse. They stood in the brewer's modest bedroom, Keith's lip curled in disgust at the IKEA furniture and discount store bedding. "The sedative I mixed with her morning meds will keep her under for hours." Keith looked at his unconscious sister with cold calculation. "Perfect. Let's move her." "Man, I don't know about this." Peter hesitated. "This is heavy, even for me." Keith's blue eyes, so much like Holly's, but empty of warmth, fixed on Peter with predatory focus. "You owe me $7,000 for the charges I made disappear. Consider this payment, or I'll have the DA reopen your case by Monday." Peter's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Together, they carried Holly's limp body through the house. Keith had studied the layout during previous visits, always planning, always scheming. The backyard was fenced and private, perfect for what came next. The dog kennel sat near the back fence, a large wooden structure Randy had built for the German shepherd they'd owned before it died last year. Keith had noticed it during the funeral reception after the miscarriage, and inspiration had struck like lightning. "Put her inside," Keith ordered. "Gently." We don't want marks that aren't part of the narrative. They laid Holly on the dirty kennel floor. Keith removed her shoes and outer layer, leaving her in just thin pajamas. The November temperature was dropping. Forecast predicted it would hit 15 degrees by nightfall. Jesus Christ, Peter muttered. She could die out here. She won't. Her brother will discover her in exactly 3 hours. Just enough time for mild hypothermia and maximum drama. Keith pulled out his phone and began photographing the scene from every angle. When the police asked Randy about his wife's mental state, about the miscarriage, about his controlling behavior, which I've been documenting in my journal for months, this will be the evidence that buries him. Peter's face paled. You said this was just to scare him into leaving her. I lied. Keith's smile was reptilian. I'm going to destroy Randall Brewer. Attempted murder, domestic abuse, reckless endangerment. He'll spend the next decade in prison, and Holly will finally be free of that mistake. Free? She loves him, you psychopath. Keith grabbed Peter by the collar, his civilized mask slipping. My sister doesn't know what's good for her. She never has. Our father built an empire, and she threw it away for a man who hammers nails for a living. This ends now. Keith released Peter and smoothed his suit. At 2 p.m., I'll stop by to check on Holly. I'll find her in this tragic state and call 911. Then I'll call my friend Detective Willard Harris, who owes me several favors, and make sure Randy is arrested before he even knows what's happening. By the time he gets out of holding, I'll have Holly convinced this was his doing. How? Keith smiled. Because I'm very good at what I do. I've been planting seeds for months, telling Holly that Randy seems angry about the baby, suggesting he might resent her. Little comments, subtle implications. In her current state, drugged and traumatized, she'll believe whatever narrative I give her. Peter looked at Holly's unconscious form in the kennel and felt his soul blacken a little more. But he was in too deep to back out now. What neither man knew was that Randy Brewer wasn't the simple construction worker Keith assumed. Randy's past was complicated, a past he'd left behind when he met Holly, but one that had taught him to recognize predators. And Randy had been watching Keith closely, documenting every suspicious interaction, every too interested question about their finances and schedule. Randy didn't have proof yet, but he had instincts honed in a world Keith's privilege could never imagine. And those instincts were screaming that Keith Hickman was a threat. Chapter 3. The frame locks shut. Randy's phone rang at 2:47 p.m. He was 40 feet up on scaffolding, reviewing structural plans with his crew, when Detective Willard Harris's number flashed on the screen. Mr. Brewer, this is Detective Harris with Pittsburgh PD. I need you to come to UPMC Presbyterian Hospital immediately. It's about your wife. Randy's blood turned to ice. What happened? Is she okay? We'll discuss it when you arrive. Come to the emergency entrance and ask for me. The 40-minute drive from Homestead took Randy 23 minutes. He burst through the ER doors with his heart hammering, still wearing his work boots and dust-covered jeans. Detective Harris was waiting, a thin man in his 50s with a gray mustache and eyes that had seen too much. Where is she? Where's Holly? She's being treated for hypothermia and exposure. Mr. Brewer, I need to ask you some questions. Harris gestured to a private waiting room. Hypothermia? What the hell are you talking about? Randy's voice rose, drawing stares from other visitors. Your wife was found unconscious in a dog kennel in your backyard at approximately 2 p.m. The temperature was 19 degrees. Her brother Keith Hickman discovered her when he came to check on her. Randy felt the floor tilt. That's impossible. I left her in bed this morning. She was sleeping. I texted her. We have your phone records, Mr. Brewer. You texted her 3 times, and she didn't respond. Were you aware she was outside? Of course not. Why would she be outside? That doesn't make any sense. Randy's mind raced. Holly could barely get out of bed. How could she have gone into the backyard, into the kennel? I need to see her. In a moment. Mr. Hickman has made some serious allegations about the circumstances of your wife's miscarriage and your behavior toward her since. He's provided documentation of concerning statements and patterns. Randy's confusion crystallized into understanding. Keith did this. He set this up. Harris's expression hardened. Mr. Brewer, I'd advise you to be very careful about accusing your wife's brother, a respected attorney, of staging a crime scene without evidence. Then let me talk to Holly. She'll tell you. Your wife is heavily sedated and suffering from moderate hypothermia. When she becomes coherent, we'll take her statement. Harris pulled out handcuffs. Randall Brewer, you're under arrest for reckless endangerment and domestic abuse. You have the right to remain silent. Randy's world exploded into red rage, but years of self-control kept him from the violence screaming through his veins. Fighting would only make it worse. Instead, he forced his hands behind his back and let Harris cuff him, his mind already working through the impossible situation. As Harris led him through the hospital, Randy caught a glimpse of Keith Hickman standing outside Holly's room. Their eyes met across the corridor, and Keith's expression, smug, victorious, told Randy everything he needed to know. This wasn't an accident. This was war. And Randy realized with cold clarity that Keith had grossly miscalculated. The construction foreman Keith dismissed as beneath his sister had spent his teenage years surviving Pittsburgh's roughest neighborhoods. He'd learned to fight, to strategize, to recognize betrayal before it struck. He'd built himself into something better, something clean, for Holly. But Keith had just ripped away every reason Randy had to stay civilized. In the holding cell that night, Randy sat in silence while his cellmate, a DUI offender named Casey Carson, rambled nervously. Randy's mind was a battlefield of calculation. Keith had money, connections, and the law on his side. Randy had nothing but his wits and a burning need to protect his wife. First, he needed to get out. Then he needed to understand the full scope of Keith's plan. And finally, when the time was right, he would show Keith Hickman what happened when you backed a predator into a corner. Randy's public defender, an overworked woman named Valerie Vega, visited him the next morning. Mr. Brewer, your bail hearing is this afternoon. The DA is pushing for high bail, given the severity of the charges. Your brother-in-law has provided extensive documentation suggesting a pattern of controlling behavior. It's all fabricated, Randy said calmly. Too calmly. Valerie studied him with shrewd eyes. You're remarkably composed for someone facing 5 to 15 years. Tell me about Keith Hickman's involvement in this case. He's the one who found your wife and called 911. He's been cooperative with. He's the one who put her there. Randy leaned forward. And I'm going to prove it. Chapter 4. Cracks in the Foundation. The bail hearing went exactly as Keith had orchestrated. His testimony was devastating. 12 months of documented concerns about Randy's increasingly volatile behavior following Holly's pregnancy. Text messages taken out of context. Dinner conversations twisted into threats. Keith even produced a journal he claimed Holly had been keeping, filled with fears about her husband's dark moods. Randy sat in silence as his life was dismantled with surgical precision. The judge set bail at $150,000. Randy's construction company had assets, but liquidity was another matter. His friend and business partner, Thomas Stanley, posted the bail using the company line of credit, a move that could sink their business if Randy fled. You better be innocent, Thomas said as they walked out of the courthouse 72 hours after Randy's arrest. Thomas was 55, a former Marine who'd mentored Randy since he was 18. Because I just bet my retirement on you. Keith Hickman framed me, Randy said flatly. I need to see Holly. She's still in the hospital. Keith's had her declared temporarily incompetent to make medical decisions due to psychological trauma. He's her medical proxy. Randy stopped walking. He what? Called in favors from 2 psychiatrists who evaluated her while she was still sedated and traumatized. Signed paperwork claiming she's a danger to herself. The hospital won't let you see her without his permission. Randy's hands clenched into fists. Keith had thought of everything, boxed him in from every angle. But Keith had made one critical mistake. He assumed Randy would play by the rules. Thomas, I need you to do something for me. Don't ask questions, just do it. I'm listening. Find Peter Simon. He's a former paramedic, lost his license about 5 years ago, does odd medical jobs under the table. Keith used him before for something. I saw them meeting at a bar 6 months ago. I didn't think anything of it then, but now. Randy's jaw worked. Keith needed help moving Holly. He couldn't have done it alone, and he wouldn't trust just anyone. Thomas nodded slowly. And if I find this Peter? We convince him that confessing is better than being Keith's accomplice when this all falls apart. Because it will fall apart. Randy's eyes were chips of flint. Keith's smart, but he's arrogant. He'll make a mistake. While Thomas began his search, Randy took a different approach. He couldn't see Holly, but he could see the scene. He returned to their home, still taped off as a crime scene, and stood in the backyard, studying everything with new eyes. The kennel was exactly as they'd left it. Randy photographed everything from every angle, then studied the ground. November had been dry, the earth hard. But there, faint drag marks from the back door to the kennel, not the kind of marks Holly's bare feet would have made. The kind of marks made when two people carry dead weight. Inside the kennel, Randy found something the police had missed. Keith had been careful, but not perfect. Snagged on a rough wood splinter was a single thread of expensive wool, camel-colored, like the coat Keith had been wearing at the hospital. Randy photographed it with his phone's macro lens before carefully collecting it with tweezers. It wasn't much, but it was something. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Your wife woke up today. Keith told her you did this. She believes him. You've lost her. A friend. Randy stared at the message, then at their bedroom window. Holly was awake and poisoned against him. But Randy knew his wife better than Keith ever could. Holly was many things, artistic, emotional, fragile in some ways. But she wasn't stupid. If Randy could just get to her, make her remember who they were together, make her question Keith's narrative. He needed inside that hospital. And he needed it tonight. Chapter 5. The Truth Serum. Randy stood across the street from UPMC Presbyterian at 11 p.m., watching the staff entrance. He'd changed clothes, dark jeans, a navy jacket, a hospital ID badge he'd borrowed from Thomas's nephew, who worked in maintenance. The ID wouldn't pass close scrutiny, but at night, with confidence, it might get him past the first checkpoint. What he was about to do could land him back in jail. Violating a restraining order, trespassing, possibly kidnapping if Keith spun it right. But Randy was done playing defense. He walked through the staff entrance with his head up and shoulders back, nodded at the security guard scanning badges. The scanner beeped red, and Randy's heart stopped. Badge reader's been glitchy all night. The guard muttered, waving him through. Third shift IT won't come fix it till morning. Randy kept walking, forcing himself to move naturally. He took the stairs to the fourth floor, where Thomas had discovered Holly was being kept, and found her room number through a friendly nurse who thought he was from maintenance checking a ventilation issue. Room 447. No guard outside, which meant Keith was confident in his control. Randy waited until the nurse rotation change at midnight, then slipped inside. Holly was awake, staring at the ceiling with empty eyes. She turned at the sound of the door, and her expression crumpled into something between terror and confusion. Randy. Her voice was hoarse. You can't be here. Keith said. Keith's lying to you. Randy moved slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. Holly, please. Look at me. Really look at me. Do you honestly believe I would hurt you? Tears spilled down Holly's pale cheeks. I don't know what to believe anymore. He showed me pictures. You were so angry about the baby. I was never angry. I was heartbroken. We both were. Randy sat in the chair beside her bed, maintaining distance. Holly, think. When you woke up, what's the first thing you remember? I was in the kennel. I was so cold. Keith found me, and he said you'd put me there because I was useless after losing Emma. Randy's voice cracked. I would never say that. Never. You are everything to me. Losing Emma broke my heart. But you, God, Holly, you're my whole world. Holly's face twisted in anguish. But Keith showed me texts, conversations where you said, fake, doctored, or taken so far out of context they mean something different. Randy pulled out his phone. Here's every text I actually sent you that day. Here's my location data showing I was at the job site all morning. Here's my call log showing the only person I talked to was my foreman. Holly reached for the phone with shaking hands. She scrolled through messages, her expression shifting from confusion to doubt to dawning horror. Keith has access to my medical files, she whispered. He had me declared incompetent. He's been controlling what medications they give me. I can feel it. I'm so foggy all the time, can't think straight. Because he's drugging you to keep you compliant. Randy's voice hardened. Holly, your brother didn't save you. He's the one who put you in that kennel. He set this whole thing up to destroy me and control you. But why? Keith loves me. He's my brother. Keith doesn't love you. He owns you. Or he thinks he does. Randy finally moved closer, taking Holly's hand. Remember when we first started dating? Keith tried to pay me to break up with you. $50,000 to disappear. I told you, and you confronted him, and he swore he was just testing me. What if that wasn't a test? What if Keith has always been willing to do whatever it takes to keep you under his control? Holly's breathing quickened. The journal. He showed the police a journal he said I'd been keeping. But Randy, I never wrote any of that. Because he wrote it. He forged it. Randy squeezed her hand. Holly, I need you to trust me. I need you to get better, get your head clear, and help me prove what he did. But I can't do this without you. The door burst open. A night nurse stood in the doorway, eyes wide. Sir, you need to leave immediately, or I'm calling security. Randy stood, looking down at Holly. Do you believe me? Holly's green eyes, clearer now than they'd been in weeks, met his. Yes. God help me, yes. Then fight. Get your head straight. Refuse whatever medications Keith's authorizing. Tell the doctors you want a second opinion on your competency evaluation. And trust that I'm going to end this. Security arrived before Randy could say more. They escorted him out, and the nurse reported the incident. By morning, Randy had another court appearance, violating the restraining order. More bail, more conditions, more restrictions. But he'd accomplished his mission. Holly knew the truth. And that changed everything. Chapter 6. The Accomplice Breaks. Thomas Stanley found Peter Simon 3 days later, working as an unlicensed home health aide in Wilkinsburg. Thomas didn't approach him directly. Instead, he waited until Peter's shift ended, then followed him to a dive bar on Penn Avenue. Randy met them there, sitting in a back booth with a clear view of the door. When Peter walked in, Thomas caught his eye and gestured to Randy's booth. Peter's face went white. I don't want any trouble, Peter said, frozen near the entrance. Then sit down and talk, Randy said calmly. Because right now, you're an accomplice to attempted murder. Keith Hickman drugged my wife, put her in a kennel to die, and framed me for it. You helped him. That makes you just as guilty. Peter's hands shook. I didn't know she could die. Keith said. Keith lies. Randy's voice was cold steel. Sit down. Peter slid into the booth across from Randy. Up close, he looked haunted, dark circles under his eyes, tremors in his hands. The look of a man who hadn't slept since that day. Keith's going to throw you under the bus the second things get hot, Randy continued. You know it, I know it. Men like him don't take falls. They sacrifice pawns. And that's what you are to him, a pawn. He'll destroy me if I talk. He's got connections, money, and I've got nothing to lose. Randy leaned forward. Keith took my wife, my freedom, my reputation. He thought he could break me. Instead, he created someone with absolutely no reason to play nice anymore. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me exactly what Keith planned, how he executed it, and what leverage he has on you. Then you're going to wear a wire when you talk to him. He'll never confess. Keith's too smart. Randy smiled, and it was a predator's smile. Keith's weakness is his arrogance. He thinks he's untouchable, and arrogant men love to gloat. Randy pulled out his phone and showed Peter a photo. Keith's camel coat, the pulled thread, the timeline. I've got physical evidence placing him at my house during the crime. I've got Holly's statement that she never wrote that journal. I've got your testimony about the drugging. What I need is Keith's voice admitting what he did. Peter's resolve cracked. What do I get out of this? Reduced charges. Testify against Keith, and I'll make sure the DA knows you cooperated. Keep your mouth shut, and I'll make sure every piece of evidence points to you as the mastermind, with Keith as your victim. I can be very convincing when I need to be. It was a bluff. Randy didn't have nearly that much leverage, but Peter didn't know that. And the guilt eating at him was doing half of Randy's work. Okay, Peter whispered. Okay, I'll do it. Thomas set up the wire with help from a private investigator who owed him favors. Peter called Keith 2 days later, saying he needed to meet, that the guilt was eating him alive, and he needed reassurance that everything would be okay. Keith, predictably, agreed to meet at his penthouse. After all, what threat could Peter possibly pose? Randy and Thomas sat in a van outside Keith's building, listening through headphones. The conversation started innocuously, small talk, Keith offering Peter a drink. Then Peter said, Keith, I can't stop thinking about Holly in that kennel. What if she'd actually died? She wasn't going to die. I calculated the timing perfectly. Keith's voice was smooth, unconcerned. But drugging her, staging the scene, what if Randy proves it? Keith laughed. With what? The police are on my side. Holly believes me. Randy's a convicted criminal with a violent past who thought he could marry above his station. He's done. His past? What do you mean? Do your homework, Peter. Randall Brewer spent 2 years in juvenile detention for aggravated assault when he was 16. Sealed records. But I have a judge who owes me favors. That little detail will come out during trial. The violent thug who finally snapped. The jury will eat it up. In the van, Randy's jaw clenched. Keith had dug up his past. The fight that sent Randy to juvie. The fight that saved his little sister from her abusive boyfriend. The fight that taught Randy that violence was sometimes the only language predators understood. "You've thought of everything," Peter said, and his admiration sounded genuine enough that Keith relaxed further. "I always do. Holly will come around eventually. She'll thank me for saving her from that mistake. And if she doesn't," Keith paused, "well, I control her trust fund. She'll learn to be grateful, or she'll learn to be poor. Either way, I win." Randy pulled off his headphones. "That's enough. That's more than enough." They had him. Keith Hickman's own words, caught on tape, confessing to everything. Now came the hard part, taking down a man with connections, money, and the law on his side. Randy smiled in the darkness of the van. Keith thought he'd won, but Randy had been playing a different game all along. And the final move was about to begin. Chapter 7. The trap is set. Randy sat in Valerie Vega's cramped office. The recording played for the third time. His public defender's expression had transformed from skepticism to grim satisfaction to predatory focus. "This is good," she said, "but it's not enough." "What do you mean it's not enough?" "He confesses to everything. He confesses to Peter Simon, in his private home, without knowing he's being recorded. A defense attorney, a good one, which Keith will hire, will argue entrapment, coercion, illegal wiretapping. Peter's testimony becomes crucial, and Peter's a felon with motivation to lie." Valerie shook her head. "We need more. We need Keith to hang himself publicly, in a way that can't be explained away." Randy's phone buzzed. A text from Holly. "Keith's planning something. Moving me to a private facility tomorrow for intensive treatment. He's scared. I can see it." Randy showed the text to Valerie. "He's trying to isolate her completely. Once she's in a private facility he controls, we'll never reach her. Then we move tonight." Valerie pulled out her phone and made a call. "Judge Adrian Duffy? It's Valerie Vega. I need an emergency hearing on the Brewer case." "Yes, tonight. Because I have evidence that will completely exonerate my client and expose a conspiracy." 2 hours later, they stood in Judge Duffy's chambers. Randy, Valerie, Detective Harris, the DA, and Keith Hickman. Keith had come reluctantly, summoned by the judge, confident in his untouchable status. "This better be good, Ms. Vega," Judge Duffy said. She was 60, sharp-eyed, with a reputation for intolerance toward deception in her courtroom. Valerie played the recording. The room fell silent as Keith's voice filled the air, each word another nail in his coffin. Randy watched Keith's face cycle through denial, shock, rage, and finally, calculation. Even now, Keith was working angles, planning his defense. "Your Honor," Keith said smoothly when the recording ended, "this is clearly a fabrication." "That's not my voice." "Voice analysis will prove otherwise," Valerie interrupted. "We also have physical evidence placing you at the crime scene, testimony from Peter Simon, and Holly Brewer's sworn statement, delivered to my office 3 hours ago, detailing how you drugged her and manipulated her medical care." Keith's composure cracked. "Holly's mentally incompetent. Her statement is worthless." "Actually," Judge Duffy said coldly, "Holly Brewer was evaluated by 3 independent psychiatrists this afternoon and declared fully competent. The previous evaluations were conducted while she was under heavy sedation, sedation you authorized without proper medical justification. Mr. Hickman, you're an officer of the court. These allegations are extraordinarily serious. Their lies orchestrated by a desperate man." "Detective Harris," Judge Duffy continued, "arrest Keith Hickman for attempted murder, reckless endangerment, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice." "Your Honor, you can't." Keith's face reddened with rage and fear. "I am a respected attorney with 20 years. You're a criminal who used his position to frame an innocent man and attempted to murder your own sister." Judge Duffy's voice was granite. "All charges against Randall Brewer are dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Hickman, you're remanded to custody without bail pending trial." Detective Harris approached Keith with handcuffs, and for the first time, Randy saw real fear in his brother-in-law's eyes. "This isn't over," Keith hissed at Randy as Harris cuffed him. "I have resources, connections." "Not anymore, you don't." Randy's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute conviction. "See, While you were busy gloating, I did my homework too. Your law firm? I sent them copies of the recording. The Bar Association? Got theirs an hour ago. Your judge friends who owe you favors? They're about to be investigated for corruption. And your high society friends? They don't stand by criminals, Keith. They devour them. Keith's face went purple. You blue-collar piece of trash. Randy leaned close enough that only Keith could hear. You wanted to know who I really am? You dug up my past. The kid who went to juvie for beating down his sister's abuser. You thought that made me a thug. But what you didn't understand is that I learned something important in those 2 years. I learned patience. I learned strategy. And I learned that men like you, bullies who hide behind money and status, always fold when someone fights back smart instead of hard. Harris pulled Keith toward the door, but Keith thrashed against the cuffs. Holly will never forgive you for this. She'll hate you for destroying her brother. Randy's expression was sad. Holly will hate what you are, but she'll forgive me for exposing it. Because that's who she is, better than both of us combined. Chapter 8. Burning Down the House. The trial of Commonwealth versus Keith Hickman became a media sensation. The headline wrote themselves, "Prominent attorney attempts to murder sister, frames brother-in-law." Every detail that emerged was more damning than the last. The prosecution, armed with Peter Simon's testimony, the recording, physical evidence, and Holly's statement, built an airtight case. But Randy wasn't satisfied with just a conviction. Keith had tried to destroy his entire life, his reputation, his marriage, his freedom. Randy wanted scorched earth. Working with Thomas and a team of investigators, Randy uncovered Keith's deeper rot. The drugging of Holly wasn't his first manipulation. They found 3 prior cases where Keith had used similar tactics: drugging, gaslighting, and fabricating evidence to control or destroy people who threatened his interests. One case involved a junior associate at his firm who discovered Keith was billing clients for work never performed, a 6-figure fraud spanning years. Keith had drugged the associate's coffee during a meeting, then discovered him passed out with cocaine planted on his desk. The associate was fired in disgrace and later died by suicide. Another involved Keith's ex-wife, who tried to leave him. Keith had her declared mentally incompetent and controlled her medical care for 2 years before she finally escaped and fled to another state. She'd been too terrified to press charges. Randy tracked down these victims and others, documenting everything. He fed the information to reporters, to the Bar Association, to federal investigators. Each revelation was a controlled detonation in Keith's carefully constructed life. Keith's law firm dropped him and filed complaints with the bar. His assets were frozen pending civil suits from his victims. His social circle vanished overnight. Nobody wanted to be associated with the monster in the headlines. But Randy's masterstroke came during the trial itself. Keith's defense attorney tried to paint Randy as the real villain, a man with a violent past who'd orchestrated an elaborate frame-up. He brought up the juvenile assault conviction, spinning it as proof of Randy's dangerous nature. Randy sat calmly through the accusations. Then, when called to testify, he told the complete story. "When I was 16, Randy said from the witness stand, my sister Sherry was dating a college student named Gregory Butler. He was 23. After 6 months, he started hitting her. She was too scared to tell our parents. So I did what any brother would do. I confronted him. He pulled a knife. I took it from him and beat him badly enough that he needed surgery. I went to juvenile detention for 2 years. And I'd do it again." The courtroom was silent. Keith Hickman likes to use my past to prove I'm violent. But what my past actually proves is that I protect the people I love. Keith gambled that I wouldn't fight back, that I'd be too intimidated by his money and status. He was wrong. I didn't frame Keith. I just refused to let him bury the truth. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Keith Hickman was sentenced to 15 years without possibility of parole. Standing in shackles, his expensive suit rumpled and his face gaunt, Keith looked at Randy one last time. "You should have just left," Keith said quietly. "Should have taken my $50,000 and walked away. Holly would have forgotten you eventually." Randy shook his head. "No, Keith. She wouldn't have. Because unlike you, I actually love her. And that's something you never could understand." Chapter 9. After the Storm. 6 months after Keith's conviction, Randy stood in the nursery again. The room smelled of fresh paint, periwinkle blue this time, for the son that Holly was carrying. 7 months along and healthy, The pregnancy monitored by doctors Holly actually trusted. "You're going to wear a hole in the floor," Holly said from the doorway. Her auburn hair was longer now, her face fuller with health and happiness. The darkness that had consumed her after Emma's loss had lifted, replaced by cautious hope. Randy turned and smiled. "Just making sure everything's perfect." Holly crossed to him and wrapped her arms around his waist, her pregnant belly pressed between them. "It's already perfect. We're perfect, are we?" Randy's voice was soft. After everything, I know exactly who you are." Holly looked up at him, green eyes clear and bright. "You're the man who fought through hell to save me, who exposed my brother's evil when I was too blind to see it, who loved me even when I doubted you." "I broke my promise," Randy said. "I told you we'd heal together. Instead, I brought war to our doorstep." "No, Keith brought the war. You just finished it." Holly took his face in her hands. "Do you know what the therapist told me? She said most people would have given up, taken a plea deal, saved themselves, cut their losses. But you never even considered leaving me. Not once." Randy's throat tightened. "I couldn't. You're my family. And you're mine. The only family that matters." They stood in the nursery, holding each other, until the moment passed from grief to gratitude. Emma would always be a part of their story, a daughter lost too soon. But their son would be born into a family forged stronger by surviving the unthinkable. Randy's phone buzzed. A text from Thomas. "Company got the Westinghouse contract. $8 million project. You were right. The publicity from the trial actually helped. Clients want to work with that guy who took down the corrupt lawyer. Drinks tonight." Randy showed Holly the text. She laughed, the first real laugh he'd heard from her in months. "You're going to have to buy Thomas a very expensive bottle of something," she said. "I'm going to buy him a car." Randy pocketed his phone. He risked everything to help me. His retirement, his business, his freedom if things had gone wrong. "That's what family does," Holly said simply. Later that evening, Randy drove to Essia Mercer to visit Peter Simon. Peter had received a reduced sentence, 3 years, in exchange for his testimony against Keith. He'd be eligible for parole in 18 months. They sat across from each other in the visiting room, separated by scratched plexiglass. "Why are you here?" Peter asked. "I helped him hurt you." "You also helped me stop him," Randy replied. "And you did the right thing in the end. That counts for something." Peter's eyes reddened. "I destroyed my life for Keith's $7,000. Sold my integrity, my freedom. And for what? For a lesson." Randy leaned forward. "When you get out, come find me. My company's expanding. We can always use people who've learned to value integrity after losing it." Peter stared. "You'd give me a job? After what I did? Keith put you in an impossible position and exploited your weakness. That doesn't make you evil, it makes you human. But you chose to do the right thing when it counted. Yeah, I'd give you a job. Prove to me you've learned from this." On the drive home, Randy stopped at the cemetery where Emma was buried. He stood at the small gravestone, just Emma Brewer and her dates, and finally allowed himself to grieve fully. "Your mom and I are going to be okay," he said quietly. "And your brother, his name's going to be Jack. He's going to know about you. We'll tell him he has a big sister watching over him. And we'll teach him what really matters in life. Protect your family, stand up to bullies, and never, ever let status or money make you think you're better than anyone else." The November wind, almost exactly a year since the nightmare began, rustled through the barren trees. Randy thought about Keith Hickman in his cell, about the empire of manipulation that had crumbled, about the victims who could finally have closure. Keith had tried to destroy Randy because he believed that power came from control, money, and status. But Randy had learned, in the juvenile detention center, in construction crews, in his marriage, that real power came from something simpler: the willingness to endure, to fight, and to protect what mattered most. As Randy drove home to his wife, to their future, to the life they'd reclaimed from the ashes of Keith's schemes, he felt something he hadn't felt in a year. Peace. Epilogue. 3 years later, Randy Brewer sat in the backyard of their new house. Larger, in a better neighborhood, built with the profits from the company's success. Jack, now 2 years old, played in the grass while Holly painted on an easel nearby. The dog Kennel was long gone, demolished the day after Keith's conviction. In its place, Holly had planted a garden, roses for Emma, sunflowers for Jack, and in the center, a small oak tree that would grow with their family. Randy's phone rang. "Detective Willard Harris." Mr. Brewer, I wanted you to hear this from me. Keith Hickman was killed in prison this morning, stabbed by another inmate during a fight over commissary. Randy was quiet for a long moment. Thank you for telling me. For what it's worth, I'm sorry I didn't see through him from the start. He played me like everyone else. He was good at it, Randy said. That's why it took all of us to bring him down. After he hung up, Holly looked at him questioningly. Keith's dead, Randy said simply. Holly nodded slowly, then returned to her painting. No tears, no grief, just acknowledgement that a chapter had finally, irrevocably closed. That night, after Jack was asleep, Randy and Holly sat on their porch, watching the sun set. Do you ever wonder how our lives would be different if Keith hadn't done what he did? Holly asked. Randy considered this. We'd probably still be in the old house. My company would be smaller. We'd have never known what we're really capable of surviving. Do you regret it? Any of it? Randy took her hand. I regret that Emma's not here. I regret that you suffered. But regret Keith getting what he deserved? Never. Some men are poison, Holly. They contaminate everything they touch. Keith was that kind of poison, and the world is better without him in it. Holly leaned her head on his shoulder. My brother the prosecutor, my father the businessman. They raised me to believe that status and success were what mattered. You taught me something different. You taught me that character is what you do when everything is stacked against you. When the easy path is to give up, and you fight anyway. Randy kissed the top of her head. We taught each other that. You could have believed Keith. You could have chosen to trust your brother over me. But you didn't. You chose to think for yourself, to question, to fight beside me. Jack's cry interrupted the moment. A nightmare, maybe, or just the restlessness of a toddler. Randy stood to go to his son, but Holly stopped him. I'll get him. You've done enough protecting for one lifetime. Randy smiled. Never. Protecting you too is what I'm best at. Then we'll take turns, Holly said, already heading inside. That's what partners do. Randy stood alone on the porch, looking at the garden, at the house he'd built, at the life he'd refused to let Keith destroy. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed, the eternal soundtrack of Pittsburgh nights. But here, in this small island of peace they'd carved from chaos, there was only quiet. Keith Hickman had tried to break Randy by taking everything. His wife, his freedom, his future. Instead, Keith had revealed exactly how strong Randy was. How strong they both were. And in the end, that was Keith's fatal mistake. He never understood that you can't break people who have something real to fight for. Randy went inside to join his family, leaving the darkness of the past where it belonged, behind him, buried deep, and finally, mercifully, gone. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.